I'm trying to figure out which thing I'm gonna use, my camera audio or this audio, because it is 91 degrees outside, and so I have my fan on because it's way too hot for me to like not have my fan on. Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Isis and this is IsisSaysHi. This is fake. Anyways, welcome back. I like to make a lot of videos about topics that matter to me. Sometimes I ramble, sometimes I vlog, but I really love making research videos. Excuse me. Drink of choice right now is a Starbucks strawberry acai because I am falling asleep, even though I literally got a really good night's rest. So I'm a little confused about what my body's doing today, but whatever. Today, we're going to be talking about attachment theory, but I do have some little cleanup things to suggest, put out. First things first, I hope you're doing okay. I hope you're well. Secondly, I have a life update. I have another job. So I'm still gonna be doing the one job where I'm actually out all the time, and then doing this one where it means I get to be home a little bit more. So you might be able to see some more content coming out a bit more regularly from me again. Maybe, we'll see. I am going to be on a podcast. I'm guest featuring on a podcast called Girls Lead. They just released it today, Thursday, but I don't know when exactly I'll be putting this up, but I will leave the links down below for the podcast. It was really fun talking to Lillian. I believe Oziyama reached out to me. So laughing is like a nervous mechanism I guess I have. Me laughing, and I do this in my videos too, but me like nervously laughing does not mean that I don't think the topic is serious. It just means that that's just the way that I kind of cope with nervousness. So yeah, I guess that's about it for those two things. But thank you to the girls at Girls Lead for having me on. It was really fun hearing their other podcast episodes. Their other podcast episodes are really cool too, so very exciting. That's all. Now onto the video. I'm going to say that there's going to be some trigger warnings for child trauma. When I first learned about attachment theory, I was not primed, I think, the way that I should have been, and it's not her fault, of course. It's not my professor's fault at all. Dr. Brown, you're an amazing professor. I don't think she knew that it was gonna like hit home a bit more than it should have. Also, I just didn't read the chapter before I came in. I'm gonna give you a trigger warning for child trauma because attachment theory really does kind of heavily focus on that. Attachment theory is focused on the relationships and bonds between people, particularly ones between a parent and a child. The main theme of attachment theory is that the primary caregiver are available and responsive to the infant's needs, and that allows the child to develop a sense of security. The infant knows that that caregiver is dependable, and that creates a secure base for the child to then want to go out and explore the world. So John Bowlby, the person who created this theory, who we'll talk about a little bit later, suggested that attachment also serves to keep the infant close to the mother. That improves the child's chances of survival. So now there's a bit more of an evolution kind of standpoint. Through the process of natural selection, a motivational system was designed to regulate attachment. Attachment is not about temperament. If a big crier is soothed by their mother's return, they're securely attached. If an anxious kid knows how to scramble for safety and feel felt, it's another good sign. So this was a big part of John Bowlby's study and why he decided to kind of look into this in the first place. I guess was a psychologist of some sort for an orphanage or for foster children. And so these are the two factors that he kind of suggested and has been seen that influence attachment. So the first one is the opportunity for attachment. Children who do not have a primary care figure may fail to develop the sense of trust that's needed to form an attachment. And then quality caregiving. When caregivers respond quickly and consistently, children learned that they can depend on the people who are responsible for their care, which is a very essential foundation for attachment. So we get into the 4 attachment styles that I know everybody's heard of. The first one is ambivalent attachment. These children become very distressed when a parent leaves. As a result of poor parental availability, these children cannot depend on their primary caregiver to be there when they need them. And this is kind of considered really uncommon among children. There's the avoidant attachment. The child tends to avoid parents or caregivers caregivers, showing no preference between a caregiver and a stranger. And this attachment style might be a result of abusive or neglectful caregivers. Children who are punished for relying on a caregiver will learn to avoid seeking help in the future. There's disorganized attachment. These children display a confusing mix of behavior, seeming disoriented, dazed, or confused. They may avoid or resist the parent. Lack of a clear attachment pattern is likely linked to inconsistent caregiver behavior. So if sometimes they're nurturing to their children, but then not, in such cases, parents serve as both a source of comfort and fear, which again, disorganized. Then lastly is secure attachment. Children who can depend on their caregivers, so distress when separated and joy when reunited. Although the child may be upset, they feel assured that the caregiver will return. And frightened, securely attached children are comfortable seeking reassurance from caregivers. All babies kind of fall into one of the attachment styles. So, before attachment theory came into view in the 1950s, the field of developmental psychology was very much focused on the interior drives of everyone, not their relationships. And then John Bowlby, a psychoanalyst who researched the effects of separation between infants and parents, created the attachment theory. He proposed or hypothesized that the extreme behaviors infants engage in to avoid separation from a parent or in reconnecting with a physically separated parent, like crying, screaming, and clinging, were evolutionary mechanisms. So again, coming back to that evolution point, he thought these behaviors had possibly been reinforced through natural selection. So survival of the fittest, quote unquote, us being more securely attached or us having these kinds of attachment styles to our children helps our children, maybe more than another kind of way to attach and care for our progeny. I don't know. Anyways, that's what they're saying. But they saw that this enhanced the child's chances of survival. He thought that these attachment behaviors are instinctive responses to the perceived threat of losing their survival advantages that accompany the caregiver. So a child's attachment behavior is just their reaction to maybe losing their caregiver who gives them care. And since infants who engaged in these behaviors were more likely to survive, the instincts were naturally selected and reinforced over generations. That's a car honking. Cute. In other words, babies had evolved to send signals to their caregivers when vulnerable, and that required a response, and that kept them safe from danger. At the heart of the attachment system is a primitive kind of call and response that keeps the species alive. Children who are effectively soothed by their caregivers eventually learn how to do it for themselves. Although Bowlby was primarily focused on understanding the nature of the infant-caregiver relationship, he believed that attachment characterized human experience from the cradle to the grave. While Bowlby is known as the father of attachment, a psychologist who briefly was his researcher, Mary Salter Ainsworth, was actually the one who really brought his theory to life. And that is something that I guess is kind of debated as I was researching who exactly kind of deserves credit for attachment theory. Some people say John Bowlby because technically he did come up with a theory. Some people say Mary Salter Ainsworth because she actually was doing research on this theory way before John Bowlby actually said it. So a lot of people say Mary Ainsworth did it. Some people say John Bowlby because technically he was the one who came up with it first. I think it's kind of both of them, quite honestly. So Mary Ainsworth was John Bowlby's researcher because she was interested in his theory. And then in 1954, her husband got a job in Uganda. She accompanied him, really wanted to set up a research project testing her and Bowlby's theory with real people. So after a year of observing Ugandan mothers and babies, she noticed that the babies who cried the least had the most attentive mothers. We'll get into this later on. And a big thing she noticed in her observations was the actual relationship between two beings, something she called relational sensitivity. So she said the sensitive caregiver picks the baby up when they seem to wish it and puts them down when they want to explore. On the other hand, the caregiver who responds inappropriately tries to socialize with the infant when they are hungry, play with him when they are tired, or feed them when they are trying to initiate social interaction. She noticed that the babies who were the most comfortable exploring were the ones whose mothers made it clear they weren't growing anywhere. Ainsworth came back from Uganda to the States and did the same study in Baltimore, Maryland, and she was the first to methodically systematically observed mothers and babies in relationship in the home and then in the lab. It was kind of designed to replicate what she saw in the home, and this is called the strange situation, if you've ever heard of it. Another study was done by Ainsworth's former student, Mary Main. So essentially, she just wanted to know, does the way a parent was parented when they were a child also go back into the next generation? So children were assessed in the strange situation, but in addition, their parents were asked a series of questions about their early attachment relationships, questions that were designed to surprise the unconscious, because, you know, we're still in Freudian terms, and reveal the person's true state of mind. Results showed how closely correlated a child's attachment classification was to their parents' adult attachment representation. For the most part, yes. How you were parented definitely does affect how you parent your children. Sometimes you will parent the same way your parent parented you. Obviously, correlation does not always equal causation. It's just that, oh, it seems like when this happens, this also happens. And so a lot of researchers call this the adult attachment interview, and they use this to kind of help predict how someone's baby might do in this strange situation. Attachment is pretty much the same throughout life, and even from one generation to the next, which we just talked about. Secure adults tend to value attachment relationships and can describe their experiences clearly, whether negative or positive. Dismissing or avoidant adults tend to either devalue the importance of attachment relationships or try to idealize their parents without being able to actually say why they idealize them. Preoccupied adults, which are usually kind of the disorganized ones, are still very much involved and preoccupied with their past attachment experiences and are therefore not able to describe them well. And so dismissing and preoccupied adults are usually considered insecure. While attachment styles displayed in adulthood are not necessarily the same as those seen in infancy, early attachments can have a serious impact on later relationships. Those who are securely attached in childhood tend to have a good self-esteem, strong romantic relationships, and the ability to self-disclose to others, so talk about their feelings to others. They also have a better self-reliance as they grow older. These children also tend to be more independent, perform better in school, and have successful social relationships, and don't have as much depression or anxiety or experience it at all. Research suggests that failure to form secure attachments early in life can have a negative impact on behavior throughout life, and most clinicians suggest that children adopted after the age of 6 months might have a higher risk of attachment issues. Hassan and Shaver in 1987 were two of the first researchers to explore Bowlby's ideas in the context of romantic relationships, which is usually why attachment style and attachment theory is popular now. According to them, the emotional bond that develops between adult romantic partners comes from the emotional bond between adults when they were infants and their caregivers, and this contributes to adult attachment theory, which we talked about a bit earlier. The way that you learned attachment as a child definitely will affect every other relationship in your life. If we assume adult relationships are just like attachment relationships, it is possible, again, that children who are securely attached will have more secure adult relationships compared to those who maybe are dismissive or avoidant or ambivalent. Yeah, that's kind of it. Attachment patterns are kind of the same from infancy to adulthood, but not really. In one study, the researcher collected a lot of self-report measures, so folks kind of reporting themselves on how they're feeling on their current attachment style with a significant parental figure and then their current romantic partner, and found that those two relationships are pretty alike or similar, but not completely similar. And then in Hassan and Shaver's study in 1987, they found that adults who were secure in their romantic relationships were more likely to recall their childhood relationships with parents as being affectionate, caring, and accepting. So yes, but no. Yes, it kind of seems likely that attachment styles as a child definitely influences how you might go into romantic relationships or maybe other kinds of relationships. But again, correlation is not causation. Just because two things seem to be similar doesn't mean that they are the immediate cause of something. It just means that on average, if you took a whole group of people, 9 times out of 10, if they're securely attached as a child, they probably are going to have more secure relationships. That's not always true. And how that relationship is between your friends definitely can affect how you go into that relationship. You might maybe be really secure because they're a secure friend, but sometimes you might not. And so it doesn't always mean that if you had kind of a really bad childhood that it automatically means that all of your relationships are doomed. It just means that you might be more likely to be in those kinds of relationships, regardless of whether you want to be or not. But it doesn't mean that it'll actually happen. It's just more likely. Isn't that fun? We love correlation. So now we're gonna get into some criticisms of attachment theory. So I talked about before, right, how Mary Ainsworth had gone to Uganda and did a study, and then she went to Baltimore, Maryland and did a study. And if I am correct, yes, Mary Ainsworth is white. White folks sometimes don't understand, seriously. There is a lawnmower. I'm gonna scream. Sometimes white folks don't always realize that when they're looking at folks who they are examining or testing, they can contribute to white supremacist patriarchal concepts just as much as those who are not researchers. And it's probably one of my biggest criticisms of social sciences is sometimes social scientists don't remember that the people that they are interviewing or doing studies on are people, and you have to have some empathy and thought in that too, and ask, with the results that you're having, what's like the social, political, cultural context of that? I feel like in this regard, and we're gonna get into it, I feel like that wasn't thought of. So let's get into it. Although it is clear why attachment behavior may serve an important evolutionary function in infancy, it is not clear whether attachment serves as just as important evolutionary function in adults. We also still don't have a strong understanding of what precisely may change a person's attachment style and what is needed if we want folks to have a healthier attachment in adulthood. Attachment theory also doesn't speak to how children and family relationships work and how that might affect their attachment. So great, you're talking about how maybe the relationship with their primary caregiver, but you're not talking about the other folks that are in their life, right? So when I was growing up, I wasn't just grown up by my mom and my dad. I wasn't grown up by my dad at all. But I was grown up by my mom and my grandmother and my aunt. But they would only focus on my mom and me. My mom and I's attachment when I was younger was vastly different than the way it is now. Because my mom was a single mother trying to work, and she was an immigrant as well. I mean, she still kind of is an immigrant, but like, you get the point. The attachment style when I was an infant is vastly different from now, because I actually get to like really have that kind of relationship with my mom, be more closer to her, be more securely attached. I not only understand that my mother had to work a lot and it's a bit more easier to communicate with her versus when I was a kid when I didn't have those kinds of words. A lot of the studies, as it seems, and as some of my research about criticizing the attachment theory talked about, they don't think about the fathers who maybe had a heavier hand taking care of the child. They don't think about grandparents, siblings, daycare providers who probably had much more of a bigger hand in raising the child too. That research is lacking. And like the cultural context of attachment theory and attachment styles, it's not as simple as just like mom and dad, you know, especially when you're talking about like minority communities. It's not as focused on just like the singular nuclear family. It's focused on the community as a whole. And so if you really want to figure out a child's attachment, especially if they're like, you know, a child of color, you can't just look at the singular nuclear family. So this goes into our next little label. So they did the strange situation in other kind of countries to really figure out how universal attachment theory is. And I did talk about how it's pretty much universal, but the way that certain attachment styles are looked at in different cultures is what's very different. So for example, in a North German study, avoidant classifications were overrepresented, whereas ambivalent classifications were more frequent than expected in Israeli kibbutzim and in Japan. Avoidant, you kind of aren't clinging to your mom as soon as she gets back. Ambivalent, kind of like airy, I guess. That's the best thing I can think of. Just very like, you see them, you know that they're there, but you don't really care. So that's kind of what they found. And at first, these findings were interpreted just in purely cultural terms. So it was thought that the high number of avoidant infants in Germany isn't necessarily related to parental rejection, but rather to a greater parental push towards infants' independence. And then similarly, ambivalent classifications that were seen in the Israeli Wonderlick. I'm so sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. In Japan, was attributed to the underexposure of strangers. So while it might seem to agree with the more westernized studies, it didn't really look at the culture and how kind of they run familial relationships. They only kind of were able to align it with westernized studies. And that's what I'm saying again. When they want to look at attachment theory, it should be looked at within the context of what is probably the more popular way attachment happens in this country. And are we making sure that we're including understanding what family looks like in this country, understanding what family looks like in this culture? Do we know what parents actually want their children to be like? And that's something that they didn't really focus on here. And they kind of gave excuses about it pretty much. Really, how does attachment style work in other countries? And are we making sure that we're including all of the dynamics that other countries that are not westernized have? And in like ethnographical literature, so other social sciences, so maybe sociology, the study of people, or anthropology, the study of culture, they talk about it a little bit more. So for example, the Micronesian Society of Tikopia deliberately fosters attachment between an infant and its maternal uncle by prescribing face-to-face talk with the infant on a regular basis. And this maternal uncle is destined to play an important kind of semi-parental role in the life of the child. Another example, Balinese mothers control their infants' exploratory behavior by using fake fear expressions to bring infants back into proximity to them. So those are things that you would want to have kind of be put into attachment studies when you're looking in these countries. Great, it's a universal thing, but are you making sure that it's the appropriate universal thing? If I were to go to the Balinese mothers, I want to see a child's reaction, an infant's reaction to their mother's fear expressions. Like, what are they gonna do? And seeing their attachment style based on that. And that makes sense. Like, that's actually making sure have the right kind of attachment style and that it's actually working the way that it should. Fun fact, the Western middle class represents only about 5% of the world's population. So we really shouldn't be basing a lot of our stuff on them. It's so funny, as I'm going through these notes, I realize half of the stuff doesn't need to be talked about. So anyways, final thoughts. So some take-home messages. Attachment can be defined as a deep and enduring emotional bond between two people in which each seeks closeness and feels more secure in the presence of the attachment figure. You have to make sure that what we're looking for and what we're seeing as probably the quote-unquote good relationship, the secure relationship, is actually understood depending on the culture, not just a westernized version of what we think it should be. And understanding how your attachment style shapes and influences your intimate relationships can definitely help you make sense of your own behavior and how you think of or perceive your partner and how you respond to intimacy. Identifying these patterns can then help you clarify what you might need to do in a relationship and the best way to overcome the problems. Attachment is founded on the nonverbal emotional communication between a caregiver and infant. And when you understand what that is supposed to look like in each culture and really do some like really good work and really understand things, we always need social connection and social interaction, and attachment really does help to prove that yes, we definitely do need that. Like, that's an important way for us to survive. And it's okay if like your parents were not right 100% of the time, as long as the parent pushed to make sure to fix whatever they might have gotten wrong. That's kind of the really big pillar of that. So I'm gonna leave some links down below. There's one that's a paid one to see your attachment style. I'm pretty sure I have a free one. And if you want to get some help for insecure attachment, go to therapy. That's probably the best way that you can really learn about how to kind of be better and secure attached. Just learning how to have a healthier attachment is really important. And so yeah, go to therapy and figure that out, fam, because I can't help you because I don't know you. I mean, I also just can't help you because I'm not licensed. And yeah, no, I'm a social worker because I have the degree. I'm not a social worker who practices clinical therapy. But I hope you enjoyed my attachment theory workings. I'll probably clarify a bit more when I'm editing. But yeah, thanks for watching. Listen to the podcast if you'd like. Everything will be linked down below, as always, sources and everything. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed. See you later. Don't know when that is. Bye!